Okay, we're going to talk about the Byzantine Empire today. Now, we talked about the fall of the Western Empire, the fall of Western Rome. So the Byzantine Empire really did kind of continue on this Roman tradition. It is a very centralized government, and the capital is Constantinople. It used to be Byzantium. And then when everything kind of got switched over, they renamed that capital after Constantine, the emperor at the time. The religion is Christian. It kind of becomes its own type of religion, and that's called Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which I'll explain in a little bit kind of how that happened. And really, that was how the Roman style society continued on. So, the Byzantine Empire had a lot of the perks of the Roman Empire. So it was a very wealthy empire. You had a lot of people living in urban settings. Constantinople was a better capital to defend. So you had walls all around it. It was right on the Bosphorus Strait, which connected the Mediterranean Sea to other lands, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Constantinople, a couple different times, were under siege from invaders, and all of that kind of keeps the Byzantine Empire alive for so long. They did have a stronger military and navy because they had better military leaders. Now, what they did preserve of Roman things would be kind of everything that Rome did well. So Roman roads that are still being used today, they started going into the eastern part of the empire. So you have better road structure, which is better for the Silk Road. The taxation system was very effective. Rome was very good at getting the money from their citizens, and this did not change at all. You have a centralized administration just like you did in the full Roman Empire. So you have the emperor, and then you have a very advanced government official conglomeration. The laws in the court system I'll talk about when we get to Justinian. They kind of rewrote the laws, but they had a very strict court system that followed the laws to a T. And then Roman-style clothes, those are still going to be the same type of thing. Not necessarily togas, but long draperies, more like ponchos and less like togas. But a lot did change. So the Byzantine Empire never got as big as the Roman Empire at its height. Justinian really did kind of broaden the Byzantine Empire into its greatest age, and that happened during the 6th century. But then they lost a lot when the Muslim expansion happened. And the Muslim expansion, taking a lot of the land that you see in parts of Italy, parts of Spain, and then northern Africa, really do kind of make that stepping ground for the Crusades to kind of get that land back. But Justinian's really that big emperor when you talk about the Byzantine Empire. They still controlled a lot of good territory. So they controlled the eastern half of the Mediterranean, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, and a lot of northern Africa. Now, the capital remained Constantinople. And one of the reasons is the location of it was fantastic for military protection and trading. So that stayed the same. Your imperial court, so when we're talking about the emperor and the nobles, it was very wealthy. You get a lot of certain style clothing come about. So women covering themselves when they're out in public so that men don't get to see their beauty without being worthy of it. You get that idea coming in. You also have different territories that are run by generals. Something that Rome kind of had backfire on them, but it didn't really happen in a negative way in the Byzantine Empire, because you had effective rulers. So the central government really did focus on getting the money and maintaining social order. So we had talked about before how poor people can kind of rally together and, become very powerful in numbers. And what the Byzantine Empire did was to try and alleviate a lot of the poverty-stricken problems that they had. They also remained separate from individual lives. So if you think about government intervention, there are governments that allow people to do things with little say in their day-to-day activities. And then you have governments that are very involved in what people do every day, in and out. And so they definitely took a step back here. Now, if you look at the picture, you're going to see Empress Theodora, who is probably one of the coolest women in ancient history. She was Justinian's wife. She was a commoner. She was really the backbone of Justinian during his reign. At one point, Constantinople actually was overrun, and Justinian and other people wanted to flee the capital. And what Theodora did is she actually sent all the servants out with all the goods, all the gold, and all the really expensive things. And so when the raiders actually came into her room, she was sitting there knitting while all the servants were kind of leaving with all the goods. So she was a very strong empress. Normally she's depicted as being just as strong as Justinian, even if she wasn't maybe a little bit more. So Theodora is a great example of how women were kind of seen in the Byzantine Empire, especially because she wasn't royal in birth. So they began to face the invasions. I kind of hinted to that when we were talking about Theodora. So from 1085 Common Era, you start to see these invaders coming from Western Europe and from what we were calling ancient Persia. So you're having kind of attacks on both sides. You still have, the Roman Catholic Church set up in Rome, but everything else was kind of falling to pieces at this point. And then those Turkish / Muslim invaders trying to expand their empire. So you're getting it on both sides. And eventually, the Byzantine Empire did fall to the Ottoman Turks. Mehmet II is the emperor there in 1453, which is kind of that leading off point. And we'll get into it when we start talking about the Renaissance, because a lot of people argue that the fall of Constantinople is the reason the Renaissance really took off. Now, the Byzantine Church, they were Christian. However, there was a big divide between what the Roman Catholics wanted and what the people of Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire wanted. So one of the problems was about the use of icons. And icons could be anything. It could be a statue depicting a certain martyr. It could be any physical material item that you would use to then worship. Roman Catholics are very against the use of icons. And so you had this split. It's called the Great Schism. And this happened over the ability to be able to keep their icons. So when the first iconoclasm happened, you had a big push for people to turn in their goods and people to surrender these awesome things to the church to be burned. Now, one of the things about the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantine Church is that they actually meshed together after the Great Schism happened. So you have the emperor as the head of the church, and then he basically appoints all the church leaders, where in the Roman Empire it was really a separate issue. So there were a lot of similarities between Roman Catholicism and the Greek Orthodox Church. But one of the main things is this idea of relics and icons. So a relic would be a physical item from a martyr or a saint. And those would actually be on display and people would worship to them. So anything from a fingernail to a piece of clothing that person might have used would be put into a box and then kind of put on display in the church. Icons really are anything that deals with religious statues or religious paintings of Jesus, of the Virgin Mary, and anyone who has kind of gone into that realm of sainthood. And again, they don't have to be just paintings. A lot of times there were like little statues that people had as well. Okay, so the Eastern Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox Church does have a lot of similarities to Roman Catholicism. Things that are the same are going to be things that were taught or transcribed as teachings of Jesus. The Bible is still going to be used. Sacraments, the hierarchy, missionaries, and then both had this intolerance towards other religions. So they have this idea that if you are a non-Christian, you either need to convert or else you're basically sacrilegious. And a lot of it has to do with what happened at the Council of Nicaea in 325 Common Era. And in this council, you had a lot of your church patrons and church hierarchy really decide what the Christian faith was going to be about. Anyone who didn't conform to what they decided were considered heretics and were kind of the enemies of the Christian church. So you get that on both sides. That kind of hangs around even in the Greek Orthodox Church. So there's similarities and differences. I went over most of the similarities. The difference here is going to be a lot about the priests. So the Byzantine Empire is going to transcribe most of the Bible into the Greek language, which is good for the commoners because most people did speak and were literate in Greek. Now, the Roman Catholics, that's all going to be in Latin and still be in Latin. Greek Orthodox priests, they traditionally had long beards. They could also get married, and they weren't at the mercy of the Pope. Now, the Pope is really that central figure in Roman Catholicism. That is like the highest person to God on the earth surface, if you will say. Priests in the Roman Catholic Church, they had to remain celibate. They couldn't marry. Priests had very clean-shaven faces to symbolize hygiene and innocence. And they accept the Pope as basically the authority for all the Christian faith guidelines. So the Pope is really that highest figure there. Things got really sticky between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church in 1054 Common Era. Both the churches actually excommunicated each other, meaning they cut off all communication and ties. And basically this had a lot to do with the fundamental ideas that either people should be able to worship other people than God or not. And it's in those relics and in those icons that they really disagreed with. And